Good morning. May it please the court, counsel, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. The methodical and systematic slaughter of women by Michael Gargiulo, the boy next door killer. That's what this case is about. What you will hear is that Michael Gargiulo, for almost 15 years, was watching, always watching. And his hobby was plotting the perfect opportunity to attack women with a knife in and around their homes. What you will hear is that Trisha Picacho, Ashley Ellerin, Michelle Murphy, and Maria Bruno were all young, attractive, and outgoing. What these women also had in common was they all lived near Gargiulo. He had targeted them for murder, and he ultimately attacked all of them with a knife. From the outset, you will hear that Gargiulo was a neighborhood kid who grew up in suburban Chicago. He was an athlete and played on the high school football team. He later worked as an air conditioning repairman and eventually owned his own plumbing business. And he was a husband and a father. What no one knew for many years, however, was that Michael Gargiulo was leading a double life. Gargiulo, who fancied himself as an expert in forensic science, attacked 4 women with a knife, killing 3 of them, and then was able to escape detection for almost 15 years. How did he plan the attacks? The evidence will show that Gargiulo's plan to kill was to first identify a target who lived near him, acquaint himself with that victim and her habits and routines, and then watch, shadow, stalk, and hunt down the victims relentlessly as part of his plan to kill. He watched and waited and collected real-time intelligence on the victims, and then manipulated the circumstances to provide himself with the perfect opportunity to pounce and kill in blitz-type knife attacks, and then escape detection. You'll hear that Gargiulo's killing spree ended in 2008 when he accidentally cut himself during one of the attacks and bled all over the victim's bedspread and sheet. You will hear that Gargiulo's killing spree started in Chicago in the summer of 1993, almost 26 years ago, when Gargiulo killed his first victim, his neighbor, then 18-year-old Trisha Picacho. Trisha lived in Glenview, Illinois, which is an affluent village about 20 miles from Chicago. She lived around the corner from Gargiulo, who was also a friend of her brother. Trisha was young, attractive, outgoing, and popular among her classmates. On Friday, the 13th of August in 1993, it was hot and muggy in Glenview, and a thick fog had settled over the area. Trisha had spent the evening with a group of friends playing a road rally game and ending her evening at TGI Fridays, a local restaurant. It was a festive gathering. Trisha and her friends had all just graduated from Glenview South High School, and they were bidding each other a final farewell before heading off in different directions to college. Trisha was bound for Purdue University in Indiana, where she had earned an engineering scholarship. Trisha's evening ended with hugs and kisses with her friends. To Trisha, it was the summer of her life and the end of a perfect evening with friends. What Trisha didn't know was that Gargiulo, who lived around the corner and had grown up in the Boccaccio's neighborhood, had targeted Trisha for murder. Trisha would never make it to college, and the summer of 1993 would be her last. On the night Trisha was killed, she gave several friends a ride home after leaving TGI Fridays. She dropped off her last passenger at about 1 a.m. and then drove the few minutes to her home. Trisha parked her car and walked up to the side of the house, key in hand, but she never made it inside. The evidence will show that Gargiulo was waiting for her with a knife. Gargiulo, who was athletic and had trained in martial arts and boxing, grabbed Trisha, who was very petite, snapped her arm, and stabbed her repeatedly in the left breast, arm, and chest. Gargiulo left her bleeding to death on the doorstep of the family home and fled. Trisha's father, Rick, discovered Trisha's body the next morning. Years later, Gargiulo bragged to friends about killing Trisha. He told friends, quote, "I left the bitch on the step for dead," end quote. Eventually, Gargiulo's DNA was also found on Trisha's fingernails. As detectives worked to solve the case, Gargiulo moved across the country to Hollywood, California, and he took up residence near Ashley Ellerin, his second victim. Ashley Ellerin led a glamorous life. A beautiful 22-year-old fashion student, she socialized with the young Hollywood crowd. Ashley was very social and outgoing and soon attracted Gargiulo's attention. Gargiulo, who lived within a short distance from Ashley's house and frequented the dog park across from her house, injected himself into Ashley's life. He initially approached Ashley and friends and offered to change a tire for them. Eventually, he gained access to Ashley's home by offering to fix the furnace in the basement. Then he began showing up at Ashley's house unannounced and uninvited. On one occasion, one of Ashley's friends saw Gargiulo staring into Ashley's house at odd hours, surveilling her home. Shortly before Ashley was killed, Gargiulo crashed a party at Ashley's house and fixated on her, which drew the attention of Ashley's friends. They wondered who he was, why he was there, and why he was fixated on Ashley. You will hear that on one occasion, Gargiulo, who somehow obtained a key to the house, let himself in, uninvited, and scared Ashley and her friend. Gargiulo then ran away. You will hear that Gargiulo's actions were so disturbing to Ashley's friends that Ashley's roommate concluded that Gargiulo was stalking Ashley, and she should be concerned. On one occasion, Gargiulo appeared at the house unannounced and looking for Ashley. Her roommate answered the door and told Gargiulo that she was not at home. During the ensuing conversation, Gargiulo told the roommate that the FBI was after him for a murder they said he committed in Chicago. During their conversation, Gargiulo showed the roommate a knife he had concealed in a sheath on his ankle. On February 21st, 2001, within weeks of Gargiulo fixating on Ashley, entering her home without permission, surveilling her home at odd hours, flashing a knife, Ashley Ellerin was found stabbed to death in the hallway just outside her bathroom. Ashley had been stabbed over 47 times. The evidence will show that Gargiulo attacked Ashley from behind, cutting her throat from right to left, nearly decapitating her, and indicating an attack from a left-handed perpetrator. Gargiulo is left-handed. Ultimately, the evidence will show that the attack on Ashley Ellerin shared numerous common features with his attack on Trisha Picacho and the subsequent attacks on Maria Bruno and Michelle Murphy. While the Ellerin case was under investigation, Gargiulo moved from Hollywood to the El Monte area of Los Angeles County. Maria Bruno was 32 years old and Gargiulo's third victim. The evidence will show that on December 1st, 2005, Gargiulo entered Maria's apartment through a window, put on blue surgical booties, and mutilated Maria with a knife as she slept. The evidence will show that Gargiulo slashed and stabbed Maria multiple times and gashed out her throat. He cut off her breasts, attempted to remove her breast implants, and placed one of her breasts in her mouth. Again, the evidence will show that Gargiulo's attack on Maria shared numerous common features with his attacks on Trisha Picacho, Ashley Ellerin, and Michelle Murphy. Again, defendant Gargiulo lived near the victim, this time in the very same apartment complex where he could see directly into her apartment from his own living room. Again, his attention was drawn to the victim, a young, attractive, outgoing woman. Again, Gargiulo attempted to inject himself into the victim's life. Again, defendant Gargiulo surveilled the victim in her home. In fact, the evidence will show that a witness saw a person matching Gargiulo's description staring at Ms. Bruno's apartment in the days leading up to her murder, watching her as she moved around inside, and at one point, trying her doorknob. You will also hear that only a few days before Maria was killed, a man matching Gargiulo's description trailed Mrs. Bruno into her apartment uninvited. You will also hear that again, like the Trisha Picacho killing 12 years prior, Gargiulo left his DNA at the crime scene. After Maria's husband discovered her body and called police, detectives located a blue surgical booty right outside of Maria's front door. Forensic analysis of that booty showed that there were drops of Maria's blood on the booty, and Gargiulo's DNA was around the elastic band on the booty. Years later, a matching booty was found in Gargiulo's apartment attic. While that case was under investigation, Gargiulo moved to Santa Monica and took up residence in an apartment across the alley from 27-year-old Michelle Murphy, another young, attractive, and outgoing woman. Again, Gargiulo lived near the victim, this time in the apartment directly across the alley, where he was able to see into Michelle's apartment and watch her movements. What you will hear is that on April 29th, 2008, at approximately 11 o'clock p.m., Michelle Murphy went to sleep in her apartment. Her roommate was out of the country, so she was home alone. It was also a warm evening in Santa Monica, so she left the second floor window open to let the breeze in. That's all the opportunity Gargiulo needed. The evidence will show that Gargiulo climbed onto a railing and onto a ledge below Michelle's living room window. He sliced through the screen with a knife and climbed through the window. He went into the darkened apartment where he found Michelle sleeping in her bed. Gargiulo leaned over her and stabbed her in the chest with a knife. Michelle woke up and fought with Gargiulo as he stabbed her repeatedly, slashing her arms and hands as she defended herself. Michelle, who is very athletic in her own right, was able to get her legs underneath of her, and she was able to kick Gargiulo, causing him to cut his own wrist with the knife. Bleeding profusely, he ran out the door and yelled, "I'm sorry," as he left a blood trail across the alley and past his apartment. Later DNA analysis showed that Gargiulo's blood was on Michelle's bedspread and sheet, mixed with Michelle's blood. Again, defendant Gargiulo left his DNA at the crime scene. When Gargiulo's DNA was found on Michelle's bedspread and sheet, it linked him with the DNA found on Trisha Piccaccio's fingernails and on the bloody surgical booty found in front of Maria Bruno's apartment. Gargiulo was arrested in June of 2008. You will also hear that when Mr. Gargiulo was being held in the El Monte jail, he made makeshift handcuff keys out of plastic and planned to attack a jailer, break out of the jail, steal a police car, and flee to Mexico. Turning back now to the details of each stabbing, and we'll look at the screen now. It all started in Glenview, Illinois, in the summer of 1993. What you're seeing on the screen now is what you're also seeing on the board. This is Trisha Picacho, Ashley Ellerin, Maria Bruno, and Michelle Murphy. Trisha was 18 years old when she was killed. Ashley was 22 years old when she was killed. Maria was 32, and Michelle Murphy was age 26 when she was attacked. The basic chronology of these events is shown on the screen now, so you can follow along. In 1993, Trisha Boccaccio was stabbed to death on her doorstep around the corner from Mr. Gargiulo's residence. Gargiulo told his friend Teamer Leary, quote, "I stabbed up the girl," end quote. Gargiulo told his other friend, Anthony DiLorenzo, "I actually left the bitch on the step for dead," end quote. And ultimately, Gargiulo's DNA was found on Trisha's fingernails. Those were the nuts and bolts of that attack. In 2001, Ashley Ellerin was stabbed to death in Hollywood. Gargiulo had showed a knife just before the murder. He entered Ashley's house without permission and again lived right down the street from Gargiulo's residence. In 2005, Maria Bruno was stabbed to death in her El Monte residence. Gargiulo lived across the pool from Gargiulo's apartment. Gargiulo's DNA and Ms. Bruno's blood were found on a blue booty between Gargiulo and Maria's apartments. Michelle Murphy, in 2008, was stabbed in her bed in her Santa Monica apartment, right across the alley from Gargiulo's apartment. And Gargiulo's blood and DNA were found on Michelle's bedspread and sheet and in the blood trail across the alley. In 2008, Mr. Gargiulo was arrested and attempted to escape from jail. That's the case in a nutshell. Turning now to the Trisha Picacho murder. Glenview, Illinois, as I mentioned earlier, is a village about 20 miles from Chicago, as shown on the map. This is Trisha Picacho, who was 18 years old when Mr. Gargiulo stabbed her to death. This is the family home, the Picacho family home in Glenview, Illinois. This is 810 Huber Lane. This is the side of the house. This window that I'm indicating now, that's Trisha's bedroom window on the second floor. This is the side door where Trisha was entering when Mr. Gargiulo stabbed her to death. And you'll see a photograph of her body. And this is right on the corner of Huber Lane and Huber Lane. And her car will be parked in the driveway. This is an aerial view of the location. One of the common features in this case is you'll find that Mr. Gargiulo, as to all four victims, lived within eyeshot and earshot of these victims in a position where he could watch and gather real-time information on the victims so he could plan the killing. That's Ms. Picacio's residence on the left-hand side in this aerial view, and that's Mr. Gargiulo's residence, which was at 803 Weedell Lane in Glenview, Illinois, and that's roughly, as the crow flies, approximately 550 feet away. This is Mr. Gargiulo's residence in Glenview, Illinois. At least it was back in 1993, a single-family home. He lived there with his brothers and sisters and his mom and dad. This is a road rally roster from the night that Trisha was killed. I know this is, you can't read it from where you are, but this shows how many kids were involved in this road rally. The road rally event was what we might call a treasure hunt, something like that, where all the kids get together and they get in cars and they drive around and they do a treasure hunt and they meet up later for a party. This is the road rally, and this is a roster, and this is offered to you to show how many kids were involved. There were about 40 kids who were involved in this road rally, and this will become important later, as you'll see. This is the TGI Fridays, where Trisha and her group ended that evening on August 13th, 1993, and then going over the midnight hour into August 14th, 1993. The chronology of the Trisha Picacho killing is as follows. On August 13th and 14th, 1993, we're actually talking about August 13th now, at approximately 7:30 p.m., Trisha showered, left her house, and drove to the road rally with friends. At approximately 11 p.m., Trisha arrived at TGI Fridays with friends. At approximately 12:30 a.m., Mr. Gargiulo was dropped off at home by his girlfriend, Allison Mazeffi, who will testify here in this trial. At approximately 1 a.m., Trisha left for home with friends. And at 1:15 a.m., Trisha arrived at home and parked in the driveway. At 9 a.m., Trisha's body was discovered on the doorstep of the home by her father, Rick Boccaccio. In 1997, Gargiulo told his friend Timur Leary, quote, "I stabbed up the girl," end quote. Also in 1997, Mr. Gargiulo told his friend Anthony DiLorenzo, "I actually left the bitch on the step for dead," end quote. And then in 2002, Mr. Gargiulo's DNA profile was obtained in Los Angeles and compared to the DNA that was recovered from Trisha Piccaccio's fingernails. I should add that this particular case is to Trisha Picacho. At the end of the case, you will not be asked to find guilt or innocence in the traditional sense as to that particular charge. This particular charge is being offered to you for a certain evidentiary purpose that the judge is going to tell you about. It's offered to show motive and intent and identity. And there's special rules that apply to just this particular case, and you'll be instructed on that at the end of the case. But if you're wondering why you're being told about a case that happened in Chicago when we're in Los Angeles, it's because it's being used for a special evidentiary purpose for this trial, and the judge will tell you more about that at the end of the case. What you're seeing now on the screen are photographs of most of the people that attended the road rally that night, and there's about 40 people here. Of those 40 people, and many of these people were people that Trisha would have come into contact with that evening, no one's DNA was found on Trisha Piccaccio's fingernails except for Mr. Gargiulo's. And he was not at the road rally. So that's the point of showing all these people. This is the crime scene. What you're looking at here is the Picacho residence. In the front of the house is Ms. Piccaccio's car, that blue Buick. This is where she parked, and we believe the evidence will show she parked here and then walked across the lawn in this direction toward the side door of the residence and then up, and she was headed towards her bedroom. This is a video from the day her body was recovered, August 14th, 1993. Trisha's body is located at the base of that white door. You're seeing Trisha's body now on the doorstep. Her feet are down the sidewalk. Her head is closer to the door. This is the reverse angle. She's on the doorstep. This is a closer view showing her on the doorstep. At the upper part of the screen, at the base of the door, that's Trisha's pocketbook. And near the top of her head are her car keys. This is an angle that shows her keys at the top of her head. And then this is the coroner evidence. Trisha was stabbed 12 times, and she had a spiral fracture of the left arm. One of the stab wounds was to the upper left subclavian area near her clavicle there. The second and third wounds were to her armpit area and to her left breast. The fourth wound was to her abdomen, just above her belly button. The fifth and sixth wounds were to her back, one over her left kidney and one right over her lumbar spine. Stab wounds 7, 8, and 9 were to the left arm in the deltoid area. Stab wounds 10, 11, and 12 were also to the left arm, generally in the left deltoid and left tricep area. This is a X-ray of Trisha Piccaccio's left arm that shows the spiral fracture that Mr. Gargiulo caused when he twisted her arm while stabbing her to death. What you will hear in this case also is that when Trisha Piccaccio's body was taken to the morgue in Chicago, somebody, a pervert, tampered with her clothing. What you're looking at here are photographs of Trisha's body in the morgue. When Trisha was transported to the morgue, she was fully clothed. She had her jean shorts and her panties on, her bra, her top on, and white shoes on. And at the scene, her hands were bagged, and you'll see that in just a moment. Her hands were bagged by the forensic scientists to preserve the integrity of any evidence on her hands. When investigators and the pathologist and detectives went to do the post-mortem examination the next day, they took Trisha's body out of the cooler, and that's when the coroner investigator said, "That's not the way she looked when I put her in the cooler last night." At which point they called the timeout and said, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Her clothing's been tampered with." They conducted a full investigation, and they discovered this. When they saw Trisha's body in the morgue, somebody, and it was never determined who at the morgue, somebody pulled her shorts and her panties down over her right ankle, and somebody pulled her bra and her t-shirt up over her breasts. There's no evidence that there was any biological evidence in terms of somebody sexually assaulting her. We think the evidence will show that, and there's no evidence that the bags that were on her hands were otherwise tampered with. It appears as though only her clothing was tampered with. These are photographs of Ms. Piccaccio's bagged hands in the morgue. You can see there's paper bags over her hands with evidence tape around her wrists, preserving the integrity of her hands. There will be DNA evidence. DNA experts tested the fingernails on Ms. Piccaccio's hands and compared them to Mr. Gargiulo's DNA, and his DNA was a match to the tune of 1 in 97 million. Those are the statistics. No other DNA was found on her fingernails. Only her DNA and Mr. Gargiulo's DNA. Again, we're looking at the people who attended the road rally. Mr. Gargiulo did not attend the road rally. Most of the people you're seeing in these photographs would have been in physical contact with Trisha Picacho that night. Remember, it was a festive event. They were hugging, they were kissing. They're off to college. What the evidence will show in this case, that despite all those people possibly having physical contact with Trisha that night, the only person whose DNA shows up on her fingernails is Mr. Gargiulo. This is a DNA evidence table that you'll see when the DNA experts testify in this case, and they'll explain what all of these numbers mean. But at the end of the day, the DNA expert will give you the opinion that the DNA is a match to the tune of 1 in 97 million, meaning you would have to go through about 97 million people before you found another match with somebody with the same DNA. And that will be explained to you by the DNA expert. Some of the witnesses you'll see in the Picacho case. This is Tom Picacho. This is Trisha's brother. He discovered Trisha on the doorstep with other family members. There was no reason for Trisha to have physical contact with Mr. Gargiulo. What you'll hear is that Mr. Gargiulo and Trisha did not really have any sort of relationship at all. He was a friend of the brother. He frequented the home. He was a neighborhood kid, but him and Trisha didn't have any sort of relationship. And there was no reason for Trisha to have any physical contact with Mr. Gargiulo. Trisha was 18 years old and headed off to college, and Gargiulo was a 17-year-old who lived around the corner. So they didn't have much more of a relationship than that. This is Ms. Picacho, Trisha's mother. There was no reason for Trisha to have any physical contact with Gargiulo. Gargiulo was acting strangely after Trisha's death. Ms. Picacho will tell you about that. This is Doug Picacho. This is Trisha's younger brother. Trisha was the oldest. This is Doug. He's the second oldest, and then Tom right behind them. This is Doug. Doug was Mr. Gargiulo's friend. So most of the time when Mr. Gargiulo was over at the Picacho residence, it was because of Doug. He'll testify that he was friends with Gargiulo. He discovered the body along with other family members. And again, there was no reason for Trisha to have any physical contact with Mr. Gargiulo. This is Mr. Picacho, Trisha's father. He will tell you that Trisha was very hygienic. Remember, we're talking about DNA on hands now. And how do you get DNA on your hands? That will be an issue in this case. What you'll hear is that the night Trisha was killed, or as she was going out, she took such a long shower that it angered her father. They got in an argument about her using so much water in her shower. So when she left the house that night, she had taken a very long shower and was very clean. And then hours later, the only DNA that's located on her hands is Mr. Gargiulo's. Mr. Boccaccio discovered Trisha's body, and again, there was no reason for Trisha to have any physical contact with Mr. Gargiulo. You'll hear testimony from some of Trisha's friends, Andrew Crouch, Jennifer Spanger, and Karen Eisenberg. Essentially, they'll testify that they were Trisha's friends. They spent the evening with Trisha and scores of other Glenview High students at the road rally. Gargiulo was not present at the road rally. There was physical contact between Trisha and her friends. Trisha was very touchy-feely and was very touchy-feely with her friends, but not with Mr. Gargiulo, who also was not present at the road rally, as I just mentioned. And there was no physical contact between Gargiulo and Trisha, according to the friends, in the hours before the murder. You'll hear from Mr. Gargiulo's ex-girlfriend, Allison Mazeppi. We expect her to testify. She was the girlfriend, and on the night of the murder, she was with Mr. Gargiulo. We'll be going through the chronology of the Boccaccio case very carefully as the trial progresses, but what you'll hear is that Ms. Mazeppi dropped Mr. Gargiulo off at home around the corner from Trisha's residence before the stabbing, and that's offered to show that he was in a position to kill Trisha later. He was at home before the stabbing.
Is this a good time for a break, or would you like?
This is, if I finish this slide.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was no physical contact between Trisha and Gargiulo that night before the stabbing, and then we'll leave it at that.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind the admonition, and we'll take about a 15-minute recess into the jury room. Thank you.